I can promise you I'm not going to get through this speech without crying. I cried the minute I walked in here. Everything changes when your son joins the military. So there's a joke in the military parent community. A military mother will push, pull, bite, shove, pinch, trip, or fake you out to get to the ringing phone. And I can say that my family has experienced this. So I'm a new military mother who begrudgingly became a mother to a Marine. I see the Marine sitting up front here. Semper Fi. To say that I was not thrilled when my son told me that he had gone and joined the Marine Corps would be a vast understatement. I cried and cried and cried the day he told me he signed his contract with the Marine Corps, and I'm sure many moms here can relate to that. And there's me trying one last time to persuade him not to go in the parking lot of the Marine Corps office in Redlands, where he was turning himself in to his first day of boot camp. But the minute we dropped him off to report for boot camp, I became one of his greatest supporters, champions, his friend, and I've gained a platoon of young men that I pray for daily. Shout out to Fox Company, 3rd Platoon at the School of Infantry. The United States Marine Corps took a cheeky, eye-rolling teenager who I would beg to read the Bible, and they turned him into a respectful, responsible, Bible-reading, praying young man who calls home every chance he gets. But let's back this story up. I had my son as a young teenage girl, scared to death to be a mother. And while my son was growing up, I fought his father in a brutal, ongoing custody battle for many years. And when my son was about 16 years old, I finally realized the futility and errors of my ways, and I stopped fighting his father, but I was never quite able to bring myself to do what God was convicting me to do, and ask his father for forgiveness and his family's father for forgiveness for, in my proud opinion at the time, righteously and zealously trying to remove him as a father in my son's life. It took the United States Marine Corps and a loving God to give me the humility that I lacked. I used to think that people who cried all the time were sappy and weirdly sentimental. But the first few weeks my son was in boot camp, I must have cried every single day for weeks. At camp meeting, I could not speak to anyone without crying and blubbering about what my son must be suffering through at the moment. So after 13 weeks, when we finally arrived to the Marine Corps Recruit Depot in San Diego for my son's boot camp graduation, I had tears in my eyes as I finally did what God had called me to do years ago. And I asked my son's father forgiveness for fighting him all those years. And I'm pleased to report that he, my son's father, became a Christian in those 13 weeks and is living for Christ. My son's father and I were arm in arm with my children as we looked for our beloved son in a crowd of hundreds and hundreds of people. The newly minted Marines were in formation, if you can imagine it. We and everyone else in the crowd had not seen or spoken to our children in 13 weeks. And we were all standing, waiting for the drill sergeant to dismiss our sons so that we could finally see and hug them. But there's one problem. There are hundreds and hundreds of other moms desperately wanting to do the same thing. So I warned my children not to stumble, for they might get trampled in a stampede of anxious mothers eager to hug their boys. Finally, the young men in formation were dismissed, and everyone lurches forward. The energy in the crowd was indescribable, and I have been to a lot of concerts and crowded places in my life, and I've never experienced anything like this. I suffer with a genetic immune deficiency disorder, so I took a moment to look around and remember this moment before we saw our son, so that I would never forget it in regards to the suffering of this life and my personal relationship with God. In a moment, I'll tell you why. Everyone in the crowd was pressing forward. The love was palpable. The excitement was tangible. And you hear these cries of gladness from mothers and fathers bursting into tears on left and right as they are being reunited with their children in uniform. My son's father and I were making our way through the sea of people, and the joy is at an all-time high, waiting to see our son for the first time. And I turn to my son's father and I say, this is what heaven is going to be like. This life is short in comparison to eternity, and I can promise you from my tiny taste of being reunited with my son, there will be a day that we're reunited with those we have lost through death, and we do not want to miss it. And Jesus is the only way we can get there. Anyone missing someone here today because of death can have the assurance of seeing them again through Christ, and this experience of being reunited with those we have waited to see for so long is going to be amazing. So finally we see our son, and this picture was taken by my son's grandfather. My son said he never cried once during boot camp, but he cried when he saw his mama. So at graduation, I expressed how hard my son being away at boot camp had been for me, and 2 Marines in our family who have both been deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan said, wait until he's been deployed. And my heart sank, because it is too true. My son has not been deployed yet, and that day may soon come, and I know my son will bravely answer the call, and has already expressed to me that if he dies for his country, he'll be doing what he loves. Whew. For many of you here, deployment has come and gone. You have fought in distant lands, and you have come home. And you and your loved ones have faced the home front battle of PTSD and depression. And we as Americans want to honor you today for that battle too. Many of you here are family to returned soldiers or soldiers who died. Your love and support are critical to the mission, and the mission is to support our military. And the even greater mission is to share the gospel of Jesus Christ with them. In preparing for this speech, I watched many videos on the military and speeches given by presidents to homecoming soldiers. But there was nothing that quite grabbed my attention like viewing the treatment of the soldiers returning home from Vietnam. Are there any soldiers here today who served in the Vietnam War? Please raise your hand high. God convicted me to do something, and from the story earlier, I have learned to humbly listen. As a mother of a Marine, on behalf of all Americans, would you forgive us for mistreating you, spitting on you, and failing to support you as you came home from the war? We were wrong and proud, and we made a terrible and repugnant mistake, and I want to thank you all especially for your service. I stand here today representing the families of the military. I have many years left of special occasions, holidays, and birthdays missing my son, and I can only say that I have a mere taste of the bittersweet cup the rest of you here have courageously and willingly drank from. So I say to the families and the soldiers here today, from the bottom of a mother's heart, thank you for your service.